Hey, hey. Good to be with you all. Thank you. Let's hear it for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. I had the good fortune of serving with her for 6 years when I was representing my hometown of El Paso, Texas in the United States Congress. And here's my only fear when it comes to Sheila Jackson Lee. It is that you have grown so accustomed to her greatness that you don't realize how exceptional it is relative to the other members of that institution. I promise you, no one works harder for their constituents. No one pushes this country further in the right direction than Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee. And we are so lucky to have her leading this fight right now. Thank you, Congresswoman. I want to thank everybody for being here today. Everybody who made this happen. Too many to number, but Fred Woods first reached out to our team and said, look, with some constructive criticism in mind, Beto, you could do better at listening to and learning from those that you want to serve and represent. And the best kind of constructive criticism, he came to the table with a solution and with an answer. He said, let us all get around together here. Beto, we'll hear from you for a little bit, and then you hear from us. So today, thanks to Fred Woods and these super neighborhood presidents, we've arrived with 2 microphones. I'll begin the conversation, and then I want to bring as many of you in today. Fred, thank you for getting us here. I want to thank Bishop Livingston and First Lady Livingston for getting us started. Bishop Dixon for organizing so many other faith leaders across this state, not just in Harris County and in Houston, Texas, and to all of these extraordinary elected leaders that I'm so looking forward to working with. The Congressman used a word that is so important to me, and that is partnering. Imagine having a governor who is going to partner with Ms. T, the dean of the state legislature, to make sure that resources come to this community, that policies that are devised in rooms like these become law for each and every single one of us. Listening to and working with Ron Reynolds and every member of his caucus to make sure that we deliver for each and every single one of us, do a better job of living up to the unrealized ideals of this country, that we are all created equal and should be treated equally under the law, right? I love the idea, but I also acknowledge we've never gotten there yet. We have leaders right now who are going to ensure that we do, and I want to be their partner in getting that done. And to mention partners, there are so many super neighborhood presidents here, but I want to single out 2 who I've had the pleasure of knowing over these last 5 years. You heard them introduced earlier, Keith and Huey of Cashmere and Trinity Gardens. When we started this campaign a year ago, Keith and Huey invited me to meet a woman named Miss Scarborough, who doesn't live far from where we are right now. In fact, she lives on Crane Street. And they invited me to spend some time with her because 5 years ago, when more rain fell out of the sky than had ever happened in any part of this continent in all of recorded human history, Miss Scarborough's home flooded, just like your homes flooded as well. And because we don't yet have Jay Clayburgh in office as our land commissioner, and though Sheila Jackson Lee has appropriated billions of dollars to rebuild these communities, 5 years later, Miss Scarborough's home is still not rebuilt, still not fixed. No fault of her own, but those in the highest positions of power and public trust. And as though to add insult to injury, in February of 2021, again, not an act of God, nor by the force of Mother Nature, but those in the highest positions of power who could not keep the power going for those that they were supposed to serve. The heat stopped working, the lights no longer turned on, the water froze in the pipes, and then those pipes burst and flooded those homes again for the second time in 4 years. Not only did I have a chance to listen to, meet, and work with Ms. Scarborough, but I did with her daughter as well, because her home so badly flooded and damaged, she could no longer stay in it. And I know, unfortunately, that story is not exceptional in Houston, Texas right now. It is far often the rule, especially in the communities that for historically have been so underserved by our state government, present company excluded. I'm talking about our governor, our lieutenant governor, and our land commissioner. Imagine partnering with Ms. Scarborough to make sure that she just has the resources to get along with her life, that her daughter can move back into that home that she helped to pay for through the hard work that she did day in, day out, living by the rules, following the law, paying the taxes, and now she's living on the couch in her mother's living room today. This is where we are right now, but it does not have to be our future or our fortune or our fate. Those in power today may represent the most extreme elements of Texas right now. I mean, this attack on women's rights, the inability to make your own decisions about your own body, a total abortion ban with no exception for rape or incest occurring in a state with the highest levels of maternal mortality in the developed world, 3 times as deadly for black women. I guarantee you, these extreme laws not only are not about life, they're about killing the women in our communities right now, and we must stop them by winning this election. The Congresswoman mentioned Uvalde, and she mentioned those awful shootings at Santa Fe High School, and she rightfully acknowledged Rhonda Hart, who through her persistence and leadership was able to get legislation passed in the United States Congress. But though we know those 2 mass shootings, and we know Sutherland Springs, and we know Midland, Odessa, and we know my hometown of El Paso, Texas, 5 of the deadliest mass shootings in U.S. history, and they've taken place just in the last 5 years in this state, I want to acknowledge something else that so many of you have shared with me. They say, you know what, that's right, Beto, and we got to do something about it. But please remember that every day, day in, day out in our communities, there are people dying 1, 2, 3 at a time through gun violence, so numbingly common that their names no longer make the newspaper. Their faces are no longer seen on the nightly news. It is as though, Beto, we've accepted this as the price for living or even dying in the state of Texas today, and that is not right either, and we must change it by winning this election. And the Congresswoman mentioned this attack on our democracy. And perhaps the scariest moment for many of us was wondering whether she and her colleagues would emerge from that Capitol on the 6th of January, 2021 with their lives. And we thank God that they did. But we should in the same breath acknowledge that though that attempt to overturn a lawfully, legitimately decided election was thwarted, that insurrection is still rolling through our country, one state legislature at a time. And last year, it arrived in Texas. And despite the best efforts of Symphonia Thompson and Ron Reynolds, who literally left the floor of the state house to deprive that democracy-hating majority the quorum necessary to undermine our vote, they even fled to Washington, D.C. at the risk of their careers, even their freedom. They threatened to arrest them for standing up for the right to vote. Nonetheless, those in power were able to subvert our Constitution, to make this the toughest state in the nation in which to cast a ballot or in which to register to vote. Nearly 7 million of our fellow Texans did not vote in 2020, though they were eligible to. And it's not because they're lazy. It's not because they lack any love for this great democracy. It is literally because they have been drawn out. When our state has closed down 750 polling locations, and that's twice the number of the next closest state, and we are the fastest growing state in the union. And we discover that most of those closures have occurred in the fastest growing black and brown neighborhoods in the state of Texas. When we see that line outside of TSU on election day, which I predict that we will, 6 hours deep, let us just remember that there is no good reason that anyone, especially any American, any Texan, should have to endure that indignity in this state right now. It is because those in power fear those that they are supposed to serve and to represent. And they make it harder for them, either members of Congress, present company excluded, choosing their own voters through these gerrymanders that have pushed Sheila Jackson Lee out of a district that she has represented for years, or the ability to use your license to carry a firearm to prove who you are at the polling place, but you dare not use your student ID at the University of Houston to do the same. We've got an answer to that as well. Not only must we win this election, but we must make sure that this democracy truly works for each and every single one of us. And that means automatic voter registration, same-day voter registration, online voter registration, replacing gerrymandering with citizen-led redistricting commissions, Making sure that you can take the day off to vote when we replace Confederate Heroes Day with Election Day as a state holiday in the state of Texas. And then think of the good work we do. Common sense, bipartisan ideas. What about raising the minimum wage to at least $15 an hour so you don't work 2 or 3 jobs? Having the backs of our public school educators, showing them the respect and treating them with the dignity that they deserve and earn. Those retired educators, a cost of living adjustment every single year going forward so they can enjoy their retirement. And then following a governor who tries to make us afraid of our own history, our own stories, our own neighbors, our own state. We make sure that not only do we stop these scare tactics and this demagoguery, but we also lift the pressure of a high-stakes test that in no way effectively measures that child's potential or the effort expended on her behalf when we cancel the STAR test in the state of Texas going forward. When I walked in, someone said, "Hey, Beto, I don't hear you talking about veterans enough in this state." Those women and those men willing to put their life on the line for all of us who swore an oath not to a president or to a political party or anyone in power, but to this Constitution and our democracy. Fewer than 1% have answered the call since the attacks of 9/11. And this country spares no expense to train them, to equip them, to send them off to war, to ask them to take the lives of others in our name and be willing to give their lives at the same moment. And yet when they return, somehow the resources are found wanting in this beautiful, wealthy state, 9th largest economy on the planet. Tonight, there will be veterans sleeping on the side of the road, on a park bench, underneath bridges. In this state that does not lack for resources or wealth, the lines to get into the VA in some parts of Texas stretch not hours or days, but months or years. I propose this, that we pay any price, that we bear any burden to ensure there's a roof over the head of every single veteran, connect them with the care that could literally save their lives, make sure this land office has the resources they need to support those veterans, and those who come back and say, "Listen, I did get into the VA, but they were all too quick to prescribe me an opioid, to which I may become addicted and from which I may die. And Beto, there's something else, and it works better than that. It relieves my symptoms. It restores my appetite. It allows me to sleep at night, but to use it in Texas is to be a criminal in the eyes of the law." So I propose 2 things. 1, we legalize marijuana in the state of Texas, get with the program that's going on in the rest of the country. And then given the fact that Texans of all races and ethnicities and backgrounds use marijuana at the same rate, but disproportionately black and brown Texans are stopped, frisked, arrested, incarcerated, upon release, have to put that conviction down on every employment application form, every small business loan that they want to take out, narrowing and constraining their options. We must also expunge the arrest records for anyone who has served time for possession of marijuana in the state of Texas. Lastly, and this is something that I've heard the Congresswoman not just talk about, but fight for every breathing day of her life. And that is simply this, and find me a more Texas value than this one, that we all be healthy enough and well enough to live to our full potential. Healthy enough to finish that education, or to report to work, or to start a small business, to open up job opportunities for others, to run for office, to pastor to your congregation, to raise your family, just to be on this planet and do what you were placed here to perform in the first place. Not only are we the least insured state in America, where the largest provider of mental health care services today is the county jail system, it is the most immoral, and I will tell you, the most expensive way to fail one another today. This state, because of the people here and our forefathers and foremothers, literally invented Medicaid in 1965 when Lyndon Baines Johnson signed that into law. Every one of our border states has taken the deal, from Oklahoma to Louisiana, from Arkansas to New Mexico, 3 with Republican governors. What I will do, working with the Congresswoman, is to bring back $10 billion of your federal income taxes to Texas every year, to connect more people with care, to ensure that we're healthy and well enough to fulfill our promise as a people and as a state. And when you think about that agenda, find me the Republican or the Democrat or the Independent or the Texan who's going to argue the other side of this deal. We're talking about world-class schools, the ability to see a doctor, the best jobs in America being created right here in Texas, and every woman's right to make her own decisions about her own body, her own future, and her own health care. This is a Texas agenda. And I just want you to know this, and I'll wrap up. This can seem daunting, given the challenges that we face. I think about Miss Scarborough, who's been waiting 5 years and counting to get some help to rebuild her home that flooded twice through no fault of her own. And this woman has paid taxes every working day of her life, and they have yet to come back to her at her moment of need. And she may be forgiven for wondering, is it even worth voting right now? Will it ever change for me or for my daughter who's sleeping on my couch right now because her home is too damaged to live in today? You may wonder, given these attacks on our democracy that have effectively and functionally disenfranchised and drawn so many of our fellow Texans out, whether we can ever overcome or prevail. Well, let me close with this story that I began to share with the Congresswoman today. 99 years ago, Ms. T and Chairman Reynolds' predecessors passed a bill known as the White Primary Law. And simply put, it meant if you were black, you could not vote in the state of Texas. And there were no euphemisms involved. It wasn't how many bubbles of soap are in this bar. It literally said in black and white in state statute, if you're black, you cannot vote. In El Paso, Texas, Dr. Lawrence Nixon, a black physician, founded the first chapter of the NAACP in our state, nonetheless pays his poll tax in 1924, takes it to polling station number 5 on Texas Avenue, waits in line, presents it at the front. The judges who know him by sight and by name, because he's never missed an election, say, Dr. Nixon, you know we can't let you vote. And he says, I know you can't, but I've got to try. And he tries over the next 21 years, taking his case all the way to the Supreme Court, not once, but twice, and then working with Lonnie Smith, another black physician, this time from the 5th Ward right here in Houston. They win the Smith versus Allwright decision in 1944 that finally begins to integrate our elections. But it's only a beginning. And this state works together to prevail upon the first Texas president, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who in 1964, meeting with Dr. King and future Ambassador Young, when they asked him to pass the Voting Rights Act, he says, you know what? We just did the Civil Rights Act, and that was too big a hill to climb to begin with. There's no way that I have the power for this one. And so Dr. King, upon leaving the Oval Office, turns to Ambassador Young and says, we got to get this president some power. And over the months that followed, people just like us in rooms just like these committed themselves to the work ahead, culminating on the 7th of March, 1965. When John Lewis, 24 years old, begins a march across the Edmund Pettus Bridge, simply asking for the right to vote, to be treated as a human being and a full citizen in this very country. And what he did so shocked the conscience of this country that within 8 days, the president was able to convene a joint session of Congress, every senator, every House member, and bring them together and say this: as it was in Lexington, in Concord, at the foundation of this country, as it was in 1865 in that courthouse in Appomattox, so it is today in 1965 that our fellow Americans are willing to risk their lives to make sure that this democracy works for each and every single one of us. They passed that bill. 10 years later, Barbara Jordan, the first African-American woman elected from the South to the United States Congress, reauthorizes that bill in 1975 to expand it even further. And I just want to tell you this. At this moment of maximum peril for our democracy, you know who sits in Barbara Jordan's seat in the United States Congress? It is Sheila Jackson Lee, who helped to author the John Lewis Voting Rights Advancement Act that is going to restore this democracy so badly damaged today. My point, ladies and gentlemen, is this. Though the greatest attacks against our people, the right to vote, this very democracy, have come right here in Texas. And let's not be naive about it. Let's not be naive about it. I also want you to know that the answer to it does not come from outside of the state, whether that's the president, the attorney general, or the United States Supreme Court. It is all of us doing all we can with what we have, where we are right now. Just like Lonnie Smith, just like Dr. Lawrence Nixon, just like John Lewis, LBJ, Barbara Jordan, and Sheila Jackson Lee. We have inherited their service, their sacrifice, and their struggle. What we do with this inheritance will determine our future and define us in the eyes of history forever going forward. Because as much as I just have looked to the past to seek sources of optimism and hope and inspiration, I also think about the people of the future who are watching us now from ahead, counting on us to come through at this defining moment of truth. And we cannot be found wanting. So let me hear it from you. Are you willing to do what it takes to make sure that we win this election and come through for Texas, for every single one of us who are counting on us right now at this moment? Let us be about it. I am so glad you came out. Looking forward to hearing what's on your mind. And a quick reminder, every one of our volunteers in a yellow reflective vest is here to sign you up, to take on shifts, to knock on doors, to meet the very people who are the targets of suppression and intimidation in Texas. And won't it be some mighty poetic political justice if those drawn out become the margin of victory when we win this on election night, November 8th, okay? You all with me? All right, Miss Cano right here, my colleague, has got the microphone. If you raise a hand, she'll bring it to you, and we'll get as many voices into the conversation as we can.
Here's our first question. Good afternoon, everyone.
Afternoon.
I'm Cecilia Fontenot. I'm one of those forgotten neighborhoods. As Black Houstonians, we demand that our issues be heard, and a resolution is definitely needed. As governor, how will you handle the funds that are not being distributed equally in the poor communities? The money goes to people like Baker Ripley, Catholic Charities, and they distribute the funds the way that they want to. My solution is put people on their committees from each poor neighborhood.
Like that.
Thank you.
Yes. Let me just say that I like your solution. Much as Fred Woods did, you came to the conversation with a solution to the problem that you raised. Let's make sure at that table where these decisions are made, including the disbursement of the money that the Congresswoman has helped to appropriate to the state of Texas, that those most impacted have a voice and a say and literally a seat. So let me just tell you this. As governor, working with our land commissioner, Jay Clayburgh, whose GLO office will have the authority to distribute and disperse those funds, we have seen you, we have heard you, we know your name. Cynthia's going to get your phone number and give you mine, and I have Jay's, and so I'll give you his as well. And we're going to make sure that we use the Congresswoman's word again of partnership. It is partnering with elected leaders like Rodney Ellis, the commissioner, who just joined us right here. Let's have a hand for him, one of the great leaders in this community. And it is leaders such as yourself. You do not have to hold a position of public trust or a high office for us to want to be able to partner with you. So the answer to your very direct question is yes. And Cynthia, I want to make sure that we get contact information traded so that you can hold me accountable for the commitment that I make today. Thank you for being here. And she said, I will. I love that. I count on it.
Here's our next question.
Beto, over the last several years, Governor Abbott has attacked the LGBTQ community. And a few days ago, a federal judge ruled that Texas can discriminate against LGBTQ members. As governor, how will you protect the LGBTQ community members?
Thanks for asking this question. You go back to that great speech that LBJ gave, inspired by John Lewis, and he was talking about Lexington and Concord and Appomattox and then Selma, and all of those battles, an effort to make sure that this foundational premise that we are all created equally is actually honored in the law, that we are all served the same despite the differences between us. In Texas, we couldn't be further from the truth, especially on the issues that you just raised right now. I'll give you all some examples. Though none of us thinks it's okay, it is perfectly legal to fire someone or refuse to hire them in this state if they're gay. Though none of us are okay with it, though we have 32,000 kids in the worst run foster care program in America in Child Protective Services, if you live in a same-sex household, you can be denied the ability to adopt one of those children who needs that loving home, the very loving home that you are providing for them right now. And what we know, following the Dobbs decision that overturned Roe versus Wade, is that Justice Clarence Thomas has warned us that next is the right to contraception, same-sex intimacy, which means reviving the sodomy laws of the state of Texas, and even marriage equality. A reminder that no victory is final, and none of these fights will ever be over. And so acknowledging that, understanding that as governor, we're going to make sure that we use the veto to stop the bad ideas that might be coming through. But even more importantly, that we overturn bad decisions that are already on the books right now. All we're asking for, all I hear you saying, is that you just want to be treated the same as anybody else in this state. And as governor, you have my commitment to get that done. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you.
To your right, in the middle, a little bit over to your left, back here. All right.
Right. And then, Ms. Cano, I want to give Commissioner Ellis a little bit of time to speak. So when you're at your last question, and I'm putting him on the spot, we're going to invite him up to close us out.
Okay.
Okay, here we go.
Sounds good. And I'm going to make my way to as many hands as I can.
I would like to thank you for your time. I'm a Black veteran, and I believe that Houston is the picture of Black success, professionalism, and Southern Black life. I think that as governor, it would be important for you to have a plan to make sure that Houston, and Texas in particular, is the ground zero for Black policy moving us into a better future. That being said, I know there are plenty of Black voters who are apathetic because they might be conservatives who say that Democrats don't see them as anything other than a victim. Or there's Democrats who are disillusioned, who feel that January 6th can happen in their community, and there's not a sense of urgency to stop it from happening, that their voting rights are being stripped and there's not a sense of urgency. So what is your policy plans that are going to put Texas as that ground zero that I was describing?
I love this question, and as I have with others, I want to invite you to be part of that solution. If you want to be that leadership right here at the epicenter of this extraordinary opportunity that you're talking about, then I want you on this team. You mentioned this reliance on a narrative of victimhood that sometimes Democrats, present company excluded, will overly rely on. Let me just tell you about the aspiration and ambition that I've heard and frankly that I've seen and been absolutely blown away by in Houston. When I meet with entrepreneurs and small business leaders and nonprofit organizers in our communities throughout the state, throughout the community of Houston, I see an example for the rest of the state of Texas. And when I talk about changes to ensure that people are treated fairly, it just means that I want more success in a community that already has so much of it. I'll give you an example. We recently met with Black entrepreneurs in Texas, and specifically we did it in Houston. And we heard from those who have a hard time getting access to capital, that first small business loan that allows you to invest in that equipment or lease that building or hire those first few employees. And it made me think about something. When I was first starting out as an entrepreneur in El Paso back in the late 90s, I went to the bank. I had this idea for a technology business that I wanted to start in El Paso. I could not get a loan, in part because maybe I couldn't explain the idea very well, and in part because I had no collateral of my own. And so I remember going back to my parents and saying, you know, I've tried every one of these banks, I cannot get a loan, I don't know what to do. My dad said, I know what to do. And he went down to the bank and he put our home which by that point he and my mom had owned. They paid off those 20 or 20 plus years. And he used that home as collateral to secure a loan, and then turned around and extended that loan to me. And I started the business, and I hired people, and we got really lucky, and the business took off, and we had success. When I look at the rate of home ownership in the state of Texas, and particularly in Houston, African Americans own a fraction of the homes per capita that Anglo Americans own in the city of Houston. And not only does that mean that as people are paying rent, they're not building equity in what they should be able to own, they're then not able to leverage it to do other things, or even just to pass that down generationally to the next child, the daughter, the granddaughter, the great-granddaughter, who can use that to have a better start over the course of their life. So what can we do to work on this together? What if we partnered with, to use that word again, more community lending institutions to make sure that this capital gets deployed to where it's going to do the most good? What if we look at home ownership as a real opportunity, not just to address homelessness that we see far too often in communities like Houston, but also to build up equity and wealth that can be leveraged for more job and job opportunities in this community? We could go on, but just looking at that one aspirational opportunity, I am so excited about what we can get started in January of 2023, and I hope that you'll join me as a partner from this end of it, okay? Thank you for coming out.
Bishop, please.
Thank you. Let's give our next governor a big hand.